protests gripped Hong Kong once again this weekend, and on Monday, strikes plagued the city with hundreds of flights canceled and train travel significantly disrupted. What now for Hong Kong? And as the U.S. threatens further tariffs on Chinese goods, are ordinary Americans about to feel the economic pain? I'm Zhong Shi in for Liu Xing today. Welcome to The Point. A general strike rocked Hong Kong on Monday, creating citywide travel chaos. 8 metro lines were partly or fully suspended, and more than 200 flights were canceled. Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam held a press conference, the first in 2 weeks, and said that recent escalation has far exceeded the original political demands, pushing the city to a very dangerous situation. Reacting to the turbulence, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange plunged to its lowest level in 6 months, and economic indices also dropped considerably. 8 weeks on, what's still driving the crisis? Is the worst over? And what can we expect to happen to the economy if the instability prevails? I am pleased to be joined from Hong Kong by Lawrence Ma, a barrister and chairman of the Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation. And here in our Beijing studio by Qinduo, a senior fellow from the Pangoal institution. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Now, before we start, I want to have both of you listen to what Carrie Lam said at that press conference, essentially her assessment of the current situation.
Such extensive disruptions in the name of certain demands or uncooperative movement have seriously undermined Hong Kong's law and order and are pushing our city, the city we all love and many of us helped to build, to the verge of a very dangerous situation.
Mr. Ma, in Hong Kong, let me start with you. You almost didn't make it to the studio before the start of the show because you were caught up in traffic that was severely disrupted by what was going on today in Hong Kong, a general strike and protests. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen today. And given that, what does that tell you about just how dangerous the situation is in the city, as mentioned by Carrie Lam?
Now, the reality in Hong Kong now is the protesters set up barracks in various major arteries, including major roads and tunnels, which go through between the Hong Kong Island and Kowloon. So they block the tunnels, and so the cars cannot go through. And as a result, when I travel, I usually take about 15 minutes to travel from where I need to go to the destination. Now, I took actually 2.5 hours to actually reach there. And there was traffic jams that's built up, cars and trucks on the road. And when they were blocking the roads, some of the people have to detour. Now, as a result, the people actually disgruntled. When they approached the barracks, the cars were stopped, and the protesters were actually smashing the windscreens of the cars. And some of the drivers were being dragged out from the driver's seat onto the ground and smashed. So it is a very horrific incident, I would say.
We were looking at video while you were talking to us. None of that says anything peaceful about these protests. Mr. Xu here in our Beijing studio. What does that tell you about the current situation in Hong Kong? And when Carrie Lam speaks of dangers, what does she mean? Dangers to what? Dangers to life, economic disruptions, or possible military involvement?
Well, if you look at what happened over the weekend, of course, that's already an illegal protest because it was not approved by the city government, by the police. And if you look at what's happening today, or what happened today, it's an striking escalation because their aim is clear, that is to paralyze the whole city. And you see in some of the cases, like one police station was set on fire, and you see this lawlessness, you see this chaos confrontation, sometimes standoff between different people with different opinions. I think Hong Kong is at a critical juncture. If you look at the numbers, for example, economically, and their PMI is the slowest in 10 years, and also the investment in this city has suffered a double-digit plunge, and also the retail business suffered a lot, and the tourism, obviously, few people would go there, would dare go there, visit Hong Kong now, and you see catering, accommodation is being severely affected. I think Carrie Lam is also talking about see if somehow at a point of no return, even the recovery for the law and order would take some time, not to mention the reconciliation of Hong Kong socially and politically. That would be something really serious. I don't think I would say it's still far from the point where somehow PLA, according to the Garrison law, will be involved.
Mr. Ma, one more question about the situation. Given the lawlessness here that is happening in the city, as Mr. Xu mentioned, and the striking escalation of the situation, if that continues, will that bolster the basis of the demands of the protesters, or will it actually weaken it?
Well, I think it seems that this non-cooperation campaign has pushed the tolerance of the entire citizen to its flinch. I think as long as the protests used to take place usually at night, when all the unlawfulness, all the damaging of buildings and riots against the police and the society, before today, it all happened at nighttime, at late night, where citizens, many of them, when they're asleep, they don't feel interrupted that much. But today, it's a whole sea change of things because of the non-cooperation activities or movements being taken place. All the lifestyles, the entire working lifestyles, living lifestyles, people's movement, going to school, going back to work, are all totally affected. So it actually angered a lot of those civilians, and civilian citizens, they do not get much interest.
I want to recap with both of you what happened over the weekend, because the strike on Monday followed the protest over the weekend, and this is what happened. Masked protesters blocked major roads, spray-painted traffic lights, started fires in public places, and prevented transport from running. A group of them even threw the national flag into the Victoria Harbour, which infuriated many people in Hong Kong and elsewhere in China. If this is indication of an escalation in violence, what has been fueling the escalation, Mr. Xu?
Well, I think, of course, if you look at their demands, so-called 5 of them, of course, including the complete withdrawal of the fugitive bill, which is already shelved, and also basically the amnesty of their companions who have been arrested for involving violence, and also the so-called independent committee to do investigation about so-called excessive use of force by the police, and also resignation of Carrie Lam. But the problem is, like, if you look at the very beginning, their demand is about the bill, and now the bill is shelved. In common sense, you would say they would call it a victory and then retreat from that. But then what you see instead is escalation and also the challenging of the central government. I would say they are trying somehow with this game, to not only challenge the local government, but also the central government, but also to destroy the one country, two systems by paralyzing the function of the city of Hong Kong SAR. So there's something sinister beyond the legal protest, beyond the legitimate demand, in any part of the world.
Mr. Bob, this is a lot more than just the fugitive bill, which is where things started. What do they want? Well,
I think you have to look at it at a larger scale than from without Hong Kong. I mean, this is part of the color revolution that has been instituted for so many years to topple communist regimes and to also further the China containment policy. Hong Kong is part of China and is the freest and most liberal city within the People's Republic of China. So there has been external forces combined with internal subversive forces to conjure up an anti-government subversive force in order to topple the government, to dysfunction the government, so as to deprive the government of legitimate rules. And this is, I think, part and parcel of the color revolution.
All right, if we look at the fact that during raids last week, here's what the police actually seized: the weapons, including explosives, incompleted petrol bombs, smoke bombs, as well as other chemicals. These do not seem like your regular elements of peaceful protests. These do seem like elements of a premeditated, calculated terrorist activity. Given that fact, what is the nature of the movement and what is the nature of the protest demand and the ways that they're planning to get it, Mr. Xu?
Well, I think, of course, for this explosive, the materials being discovered, the bad place, it mostly seems to me like it referred to the group, the small group who are basically advocating for independence of Hong Kong. So that's against the law, against the Constitution, and that's, of course, I mean, you follow the law and do the right thing to crack down. And the thing is, like right now, on the social media, what you are hearing is the call for the protesters, or let me call the protesters, they are rioters right now, to use, basically they are appealed to use knives to attack the police force. I mean, this is the advocacy for the use of violence, for resorting to violence. I think the Hong Kong government and the Hong Kong police force should be boosted, and the establishment, whether they are with the government or they are against the government, they should make it clear and allowed to condemn the violence, to condemn those acts that's clearly against the law. Even, I mean, there's a lack of decency. If you look at the behavior of some of the young people, basically, there's loss of sense of common sense. There's loss of sense of respecting law and order. There's even loss of sense of the ability to communicate nicely, decently with their Hong Kong followers. For example, they blocked the train from operating normal operation. Some of the workers, they have to go to the company. Well, their life is being disrupted. Nobody will pay them, will compensate for their loss. And I'm not sure how long they will tolerate such illegal behavior.
Mr. Ma, so far the government's reaction to this has been relatively restrained. Is the SAR government in a position to do more?
Well, I think under the current Hong Kong law, under the public order ordinance, there is a curfew order where the government can, or the chief executive can issue an executive order proclaiming the city to be in a curfew state, where people are prohibited from going out from their homes onto the street. And this is exactly, I think, what Hong Kong really needs now. But the problem is, do we have sufficient manpower, particularly the police force, to patrol the curfew orders? And if we do have, how to implement that curfew order in various estates and places and housing estates in Hong Kong? That is quite unprecedented for Hong Kong.
All right, it should also be noted that people in Hong Kong, some people also came out to rally against the protesters and against their violent behavior, but that's another topic we don't have time for on this broadcast. Lawrence Ma from the Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation, Qinduo from the Pangoal Institution. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.